Here's the way we live in America. Up until at age 20 or so, we have primarily education, and there's a little bit of what we're calling here leisure. That is, you have the summers off. This generally doesn't work for most people in America today. It works fine for us, worked great for us, you know, but for most of us, this doesn't work. Then we have what is called here work, and this goes on for about 45 years. You have a little leisure here, but really not much, and that includes time with family, taking care of your parents, taking care of your kids, et cetera, et cetera. People generally hate this, and they can't wait to have it stop. When it ends at around age 62, then we have the leisure phase, which turns out to be worse than the work phase. The leisure phase, there's a rollless roll, and I'm like, there is nothing there. It's empty for most people. Now, we have a problem. The problem we have is that we're going to get somewhere between 5 and 8 more years of active life expectancy between now and 2050. So what are we going to do with that? What color is that? I mean, are we going to just like add that to the leisure box? Does that make a lot of sense? Will that result in a society that is productive and equitable? Will that result in a society that, in fact, we can afford? No. So what we need is we need to convert this into one of those things you buy in the seaside with these different colored sands, these different color strata, you know, that goes up and down through the life course, like this. Don't laugh at this. It's the best I could do. So what we need is we need something, and I even had help doing it. You should have seen the one that I did. And, we're going to have education, and it's going to have to continue. We're going to have education as a lifelong event so that people can be trained to deal with the technologies in the workforce, to participate fully, to be wired. We have to get rid of this digital divide where the elderly are not online and everybody else is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then, and then we have to have work go much later, much less later. And we have to have leisure be, you know, a fairly constant opportunity here in life. And the difficult question is, of course, not whether we want to get from that to that. The difficult question is how we get from that to that. What is the next slide? What's the next slide after this? What's slide number 2? How do we get started changing this distribution of activities across the life course? These are the core institutions of our life in America. And the question is, what will life be like in America in 2050? And it better be more like that than what it's like now, or we're in trouble. Myth number 7, the Lou Dobbs myth. The problem of an aging society can be fixed through increased immigration. Now, there are 2 issues here. The first issue is the belief that people have that we're going to have an inadequate workforce and we need to get more immigrants to come in and do the work. And this has happened in Europe. If you own a Mercedes, it was built by Turks, okay? I mean, this is just the way it is. It's fine. It's actually not true. If we continue immigration at about 1 million a year, which is what it is, has been stable in this country for a long time, but it'll dip during the recession, but it'll come back, we will have an adequate workforce, especially if we can get the elderly to stay in the workforce a little longer. We will have skill gaps like nursing and engineering and stuff like that, and we may have to make some compensatory changes in immigration. But in general, we have an adequate workforce. But the second immigration issue is that people say, okay, Jack, you don't like the fact that the proportion of old people to the proportion of young people is changing? We're going to fix it. We're going to bring in enough young people so that the proportions stay the same. And we don't have an aging society. 2 problems with this idea. One problem is that it's very recently been discovered that immigrants age. So that when they come into the society, they move up in this, pyramid. Very unfortunate. Almost regardless of what country they're from. So it means that this is not a one-time fix, right? This is an every year fix. We could do it, but the calculations indicate that we would need to increase the number of legal immigrants in the United States by 1,000% a year. Not going to happen. Myth number 8, last myth. Older workers must leave the workforce to make room for younger workers. Seems reasonable, just not true. So now there are data from every Eurozone country and the United States showing that when older age employment is high, younger age employment is high. And in those countries with lower older age employment, they had lower younger age employment. The important variable is the strength of the economy not making room for younger workers by getting rid of older workers. It just isn't the case. Now let's say we don't get it right. We've talked a little bit about what success would look like, productive and equitable. What would failure look like? This is what failure is going to look like. There will be wider gaps in opportunity, education, and wellness between the haves and the have-nots. There will be two Americas. There will be a lack of capacity on the part of society in general to meet the demands for goods and services. We will not be able to create the stuff we need if we don't keep older individuals productively engaged in society and in the workforce. There will be a failure to benefit from the potential contributions of a very large, experienced, healthy, older population. We will have wasted everything that they have to offer. And lastly, there will be intergenerational conflict. That's what failure is going to look like. Now, as we begin to think about policies and approaches, one of my colleagues, Lisa Berkman at Harvard University, who's a member of this network that I'm involved with, that Laura is also a member of, came up with a terrific idea. And what she said is that as we go ahead with our policies, we need to make sure that we have a long-term perspective. We make sure there's a gradual implementation with attention to unintended adverse social effects. We need to have multiple interventions on employers, local governments, individuals. We need to involve the private sector. And we need to have intergenerational and multi-generational tactics. And as a first step to thinking about all these different policy strategies, Lisa suggested that we need the equivalent of an environmental impact statement for assessment of the possible consequences of all new policies on the function of an aging society.